You were handed a story that was never designed to keep you safe, only compliant. You were told that if you played fair long enough, fairness would come back to you. That honesty would protect you like armor. That discipline and effort would eventually force respect out of the world. You believed it, not because it worked, but because it made chaos feel manageable. And then nothing exploded. No scandal, no dramatic fall, just decay, slow, invisible. You didn't fail loudly. You dissolved quietly, in rooms where your ideas were nodded at and then buried, in relationships where your loyalty stopped being valued and became expected, in moments where someone clearly less capable stepped ahead while you were still proving yourself. This wasn't weakness. It was obedience to rules no one else agreed to follow. Look at trust. The last time you gave it without armor? You assumed openness created safety, because that's how your mind works. While you were exposing, someone else was studying, watching patterns, testing limits, calculating advantage. You gave transparency. They built leverage. When things finally cracked, you were stunned. They were prepared. Betrayal doesn't announce itself as hostility. It arrives disguised as familiarity. It comes from people who noticed how much you were willing to give and adjusted their behavior to extract more. Now, look at your work life. You arrive early. You stay late. You clean up problems you didn't cause. And the opportunity goes to the person who spoke less but understood the timing. They didn't outwork you. They outpositioned you. You believed effort would speak for itself. Awareness would have spoken louder. And then there's how you communicate. You explain your choices. You show emotion. You believe clarity creates trust. What it actually creates is predictability. People learn your reactions, your limits, your breaking points. In relationships, your care turns into leverage. In business, your openness becomes something to maneuver around. You keep giving, waiting for balance to arrive. It never does. Here's the truth people avoid saying out loud. Fairness is a moral preference, not a survival tool. The world doesn't reimburse effort. It responds to awareness. This isn't an invitation to become cruel. It's a demand to wake up. Because once you understand how power actually moves, the outcomes that used to blindside you stop feeling unfair. They finally become obvious. Let's stop pretending the damage comes from chance. Most people aren't taken down by misfortune. They're taken down by ideas that expired years ago but were never questioned. Beliefs that once felt protective, now quietly working against them. When your understanding of human nature is outdated, every choice you make using it becomes a slow act of self-sabotage. That's why this realization stings. Not because it's harsh, but because it forces you to confront rules you trusted to keep you safe. This is where Machiavelli actually belongs. Not as a caricature, not as a prophet of cruelty, but as someone who refused to sugarcoat how people behave when advantage is at stake. He didn't analyze villains. He observed everyday individuals the moment power entered the room. Allies recalculating, leaders guarding position, loyalty dissolving the second incentives shifted. His message was never, "Be evil." It was something far less comfortable. Kindness without awareness isn't morality. It's vulnerability. Honesty without strategy doesn't make you noble. It makes you legible. And legibility is something others know how to exploit. This video exists because countless people are losing without understanding the mechanics behind it. They're stunned by betrayals that followed clear patterns. They react emotionally while others are quietly positioning. They keep explaining themselves, while someone else is tracking timing, leverage, and opportunity. The intention here isn't to harden you or turn you manipulative. It's to wake you up. To shift you from responding after damage occurs to noticing pressure before it lands. To stop mistaking good intentions for armor and effort for influence. Power doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't ask for permission. And it doesn't reward purity. It rewards perception. And once you see that clearly, you stop moving through life like someone waiting to be treated fairly. You start moving like someone who understands how outcomes are actually shaped. What you're about to hear isn't designed to soothe or reassure you. These 9 principles are here to expose why some people advance in silence, while others struggle in full view, even though they invest more effort and care more deeply. Each one dismantles a behavior that quietly turns you into something predictable, something easy to read, and therefore easy to use without your consent. This isn't an invitation to become cold or cruel. It's an invitation to become conscious. Because once you understand how the game actually moves beneath the surface, the outcomes that used to keep blindsiding you stop feeling mysterious and start feeling inevitable. This brings us to the first principle, calculated opacity. It begins the moment you notice how quickly influence fades when you try too hard to be understood. Most people equate clarity with strength, so they explain, justify, and elaborate, believing honesty will protect them. But every extra detail quietly thins their presence. What feels like transparency often turns into predictability, and predictability is easy to manage. In rooms where decisions are made, it's rarely the loudest voice that carries weight. It's the one that waits, chooses its moment, or says very little at all. This pattern doesn't stop at meetings. It follows you into relationships, negotiations, and casual conversations. You lay out your reasoning, hoping to earn approval, while others reveal only fragments and let silence do the work. Calculated opacity isn't deception, it's discipline. It's understanding that not everything needs to be shared just because it can be. Information behaves like currency, and when you spend it impulsively, you weaken your position. Take a simple question like, "What are you doing this weekend?" One person unloads plans, names, reasons, context, and emotion, trying to be open. Another answers calmly, "I've got something important to handle," and stops there. No justification, no softening. That pause does more work than a full explanation ever could. It invites curiosity. Curiosity pulls attention. Attention becomes respect, and respect turns into influence. People are drawn toward what isn't fully revealed, because mystery creates gravity. This is why those with real influence rarely rush to clarify everything. They disclose in layers, allowing others to project meaning into the gaps. And those projections often increase their value. When you over-explain, you erase imagination. You turn yourself into a fixed, measurable object. And fixed objects are easy to undervalue. In relationships, early oversharing collapses tension. In business, explaining motives hands others leverage. In leadership, constant disclosure weakens authority. Calculated opacity doesn't make you distant or cold. It makes you intentional. You decide what's revealed, when it's revealed, and who earns access to it. You stop speaking to relieve your own anxiety and start speaking to shape direction. Remember this: information is currency. Spend it slowly, because the less you rush to explain yourself, the more others sense there's something worth paying attention to. This leads into the second principle: adaptive persona. Rejection rarely happens because you're wrong. It happens because you're difficult to read. People walk into every space sounding the same, speaking the same way, leading with the same version of themselves, then wonder why nothing connects. They label it authenticity, but what it really is rigidity. Honesty isn't what gets punished. Refusal to adjust is. Adaptive persona has nothing to do with pretending. It's about deciding which side of you speaks first. Look at how influence actually forms. A boss listens for results, not emotional context. Close friends tune into feeling, not efficiency. Investors respond to direction and scale, not personality. Same person, different lenses. When you ignore those lenses and insist on showing up unchanged everywhere, you make people work to understand you, and most won't bother. They'll move on to someone easier to read. That's how highly capable people get passed over while less skilled ones advance. Not because ability stopped mattering, but because translation did. Adaptive persona is translation. You're not watering yourself down. You're converting your value into a language the room understands. Those who refuse to adapt often shield themselves with words like integrity or honesty, but what they're really protecting is comfort. They want the environment to adjust to them instead of adjusting their expression to the moment. Power doesn't respond to that. Power flows toward clarity. Water doesn't fight the container it's in, it takes the shape and keeps moving. Still water, still force. Once you understand this, misinterpretation stops. You're no longer filtered out before your ideas even land. Opportunities don't disappear because you lack substance. They disappear because your signal never arrived intact. Authenticity isn't sameness, it's alignment. You remain grounded in who you are while altering how that truth is delivered. And when you do that, resistance fades, conversations open, and people finally hear what you've been trying to say all along. Charles. Detachment is the third principle, and it reveals itself long before people realize they've lost control. Power doesn't vanish through big mistakes. It erodes through fear-driven habits that feel reasonable in the moment. Fear of losing income, fear of losing connection, fear of falling out of favor. Those fears don't shout, they negotiate quietly on your behalf. You let disrespect slide at work because stability feels fragile. You remain in relationships that shrink you because being alone feels heavier. You dilute your opinions, override your instincts, and compromise your boundaries because acceptance feels safer than honesty. At that point, the shift has already happened. What you need too much no longer serves you. It governs you. And whatever governs you can be used to steer you. Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference, but it's something else entirely. It's the removal of desperation. Consider how leverage actually works. Put two people in the same negotiation. One has already emotionally committed their future to the outcome. The other is interested, but unanchored. Desire doesn't create power. Optionality does. The person who can leave controls the frame. This logic repeats everywhere. Employees with alternatives are treated carefully. Partners who don't fear solitude command more respect. The moment fear enters the equation, negotiation collapses into silent compliance. Detachment restores perception. When outcomes no longer own you, your reactions slow down. Your explanations shorten. Your self-respect stops being traded for temporary comfort. This is why detachment unsettles people. The pressure points they relied on stop responding. Neediness often disguises itself as passion or loyalty. But underneath it's fear, and fear always leaks information. Detachment closes those leaks. It doesn't strip you of care, it anchors you. You still commit. You still invest. You simply refuse to bind your worth, safety, or identity to anything that could disappear tomorrow. Remember this. Anything you are prepared to walk away from loses its ability to control you. And once that becomes true, people stop testing how far they can push because fear is no longer where they can reach you. Number 4 is silent leverage. And it runs against almost everything you were trained to believe about influence. You were taught that speed signals importance, that fast replies show competence, that filling silence proves confidence. So you stay reachable, responsive, and ready to explain. Over time, that availability thins your presence. Not because your words lack substance, but because they never create resistance. Power doesn't expand by talking more or reacting faster. It grows where restraint exists. The moment you stop answering immediately, people reassess. When a message lingers, assumptions begin forming. When you pause before speaking, attention sharpens. Silence doesn't remove pressure, it concentrates it. You can see this clearly in rooms where decisions matter. The person who keeps talking fades into background noise. The one who waits, then speaks once, changes the temperature of the room. The same thing happens in everyday moments. You're asked a question that pushes you toward justification. Instead of rushing to clarify, you stop. You let the quiet stretch. You answer only what's necessary, then you end it. That pause does more work than any explanation ever could. Silent leverage isn't passivity, it's selection. It's knowing when response weakens position, when clarity becomes leakage, when one extra sentence erodes authority. In relationships, instant replies train others to expect unlimited access. Delay quietly restores value. In professional settings, overcommunication hands others the right to interrupt and redirect you. Restraint redraws boundaries without confrontation. Silence is misunderstood because people confuse volume with pressure. Silence is pressure. It forces projection, exposes impatience, and draws out information others didn't plan to reveal. This is why seasoned negotiators slow down instead of accelerating. Why leaders pause instead of defending. Why influence grow in the gaps rather than the noise. Power whispers. Amateurs shout. Silent leverage doesn't make you distant. It makes you precise. You don't disappear. You decide when to engage. And once you do, people don't just listen. They wait. Number 5 is psychological echo. And its power comes from saying less of what you know and more of what the other person feels. Most conversations fail long before advice enters, because people don't feel met, they feel managed. You step in with answers while they're still carrying frustration, confusion, or the quiet need to be understood, and your logic bounces off. Not because it's wrong, but because it arrives too early. Psychological echo changes the sequence. Before solutions, there is recognition. Before direction, there is reflection. Someone says, "I hate my job," and the mistake is to hear a problem that needs fixing. Update the resume, negotiate, quit. But that sentence isn't a request for strategy. It's a signal. Exhaustion, stagnation, the sense of being unseen or boxed in. When you reflect that reality back, it sounds like you're drained from feeling stuck or overlooked. The conversation unlocks. You haven't solved anything, yet resistance dissolves. Shoulders drop, tone shifts, attention appears. This works because people don't push back against being understood. They push back against being rushed. Psychological echo isn't mimicry, it's accuracy. You're naming what's underneath the words, the emotion beneath the complaint, the need beneath the frustration. When that lands, people often keep talking without being prompted. They give you context. They reveal leverage. They trust before realizing they've done so. This is why the most persuasive people rarely sound impressive. They aren't performing intelligence. They're creating alignment. Advice delivered before recognition feels dismissive. Advice delivered after echo feels supportive. The order is everything. This isn't manipulation, because nothing is being forced. You're not dragging someone toward your conclusion, you're standing where they already are. And once that alignment exists, influence stops feeling like effort. People don't want answers as much as they want to feel seen. When you master psychological echo, you stop pushing ideas uphill and start watching people move toward your perspective on their own. Because for the first time, they feel understood instead of corrected. Number 6. The principle of ambiguous morality shows itself when doing what feels right starts producing the wrong results. You acted with patience while others rushed. You chose fairness even when it weakened your position. You kept giving chances because that's what good people are supposed to do. And still, things deteriorated. Not because you lacked values, but because you treated intention as if it mattered more than consequence. Reality doesn't work on moral certificates. It reacts to outcomes. Ambiguous morality is the moment you accept that decisions don't live in clean moral boxes. They live in cause and effect. Every choice protects something and endangers something else. What looks compassionate today can quietly undermine the system tomorrow. Imagine a team dragged down by one person who consistently underperforms or poisons morale. The ethical instinct is tolerance, coaching, endless understanding. The result is always the same. Standards erode. Frustration spreads. The strongest contributors disengage or leave. Removing that person feels cruel in the short term, but it stabilizes the whole structure. This is the uncomfortable truth people avoid. Sometimes kindness enables destruction. Ambiguous morality doesn't mean abandoning values. It means refusing to let values become an excuse for avoidance. The question shifts from, does this make me look good, to, what will this produce over time? 6 months from now, a year from now. That shift attracts backlash. People accuse you of changing, of becoming colder, of losing your heart. In reality, you've stopped performing goodness and started owning responsibility. Leadership isn't about approval. It's about preventing damage before it spreads. When you judge actions by results instead of appearances, people stop coming to you for comfort and start coming to you for direction. Ambiguous morality doesn't harden you. It sharpens your judgment. You still care deeply. You simply refuse to confuse being nice with being effective. Remember this. Sometimes kindness enables destruction. And once you accept that, you stop sacrificing real outcomes just to preserve a clean image of yourself. The 7th principle is controlled exposure, and it becomes obvious the moment oversharing starts working against you. You were told that transparency builds trust, so you reveal your skills, your plans, your thinking, your intentions, all at once, believing openness increases value. Instead, the opposite happens. The more accessible everything becomes, the less weight it carries. Not because you lack depth, but because discovery has been removed from the equation. When nothing is left to uncover, attention fades. Controlled exposure is not secrecy, it's restraint with timing. It's recognizing that the human mind hates empty space and rushes to fill it with imagination. And imagination creates interest. When people know less, they assume more, and those assumptions often elevate your value. Watch how this plays out in a new job. One person arrives and immediately demonstrates every capability, solves every problem, shows their full range in the first week. It looks impressive, but it sets a ceiling. There is no room left to grow. Another person reveals ability in phases, holding back until the moment demands it. Their perceived value increases over time, even though their actual skill never changed. That difference is sequencing. Once information is released, it can't be retrieved. What is revealed cannot be unrevealed. This rule applies everywhere. In relationships, early oversharing collapses attraction because there's no tension left to lean into. In negotiations, exposing priorities hands leverage to the other side. In leadership, broadcasting every thought weakens authority. People don't follow someone whose inner world is fully open. They follow someone who reveals with intention. The goal isn't to hide who you are, it's to control how you are understood. When exposure is deliberate, perception stays in your hands. You choose when curiosity turns into respect, and when respect becomes trust. Those who give everything immediately teach others to consume them quickly. Those who reveal slowly stay relevant longer. Controlled exposure doesn't make you distant, it makes you strategic. You still engage, you still contribute. You simply stop giving away all your value before it has time to compound. Remember this, what is revealed cannot be unrevealed. And once you treat information as irreversible, you become far more selective about when it's worth the cost. Number 8 is outcome obsession. And it usually hits when constant motion starts feeling like a trap instead of progress. You stay busy from morning to night. Messages answered, problems handled, explanations given, arguments won. Yet time moves forward and nothing substantial shifts. It feels like work, but it's really avoidance dressed as productivity. Busyness is comfortable because it keeps you from asking the only question that matters. What did my actions actually change? Outcome obsession cuts through that illusion without mercy. It ignores effort, intention, and how convincing you sounded, and looks only at results. Most people don't operate this way. They chase being right. They defend logic. They collect small wins in conversations and call it progress. And technically, they succeed. They win the debate. They land the last line. But the situation stays broken. You see this clearly in relationships. You prove your point. You expose the flaw. You walk away correctly, and the connection grows colder, weaker, more distant. You were right, and you still lost. Outcome-obsessed thinking would have chosen a different path. Not because truth is irrelevant, but because truth without impact is useless. The same pattern runs through work. You can sit in every meeting, send every email, respond to every thread, and still move nothing forward. Activity creates the illusion of value. Results create leverage. Outcome obsession forces brutal prioritization. Instead of asking what keeps you busy, you ask what actually moves the needle. Sometimes that means staying silent. Sometimes it means not replying. Sometimes it means letting a small victory go, so a larger objective survives. This mindset also strips away ego. When outcomes matter more than methods, you adapt quickly. If something isn't working, you change direction without needing to defend your past choices. You're not loyal to being correct. You're loyal to progress. That's why people focused on outcomes often seem calm. They aren't reacting to noise or distractions. They're tracking impact. Over time, this creates a reputation that can't be faked. People stop describing you as busy and start describing you as effective. Remember this, being right is cheap. Results are rare. And the moment you stop chasing the feeling of productivity and start chasing real change, your energy stops leaking and finally begins to compound. Number 9, strategic patience, that isn't something you adopt after you gain power. It's what quietly creates it long before anyone notices. Most people lose leverage not because they act wrong, but because they act too soon. They rush toward results, chase recognition, reach for validation, and that haste exposes them. Urgency has a smell. It tells people what you want, how badly you want it, and how easily you can be rushed or redirected. Strategic patience removes that scent entirely. Instead of moving fast, you let situations move first. Instead of reacting, you observe what unfolds when no one is being corrected or interrupted. Time becomes a filter. Those who can't wait reveal themselves. They explain too much, defend too early, overcommit before the picture is clear. Every reaction leaves fingerprints. Patience leaves nothing behind. This is how real reputations are built. Not through self-promotion, not through constant visibility, but through absence paired with consistency. One person stays loud, visible, always reminding others of their value. Another stays quiet, delivers when it matters, and disappears again. Over time, the first becomes familiar, then ignorable. The second becomes a reference people bring up without prompting. That's reputation gravity. Strategic patience also functions as protection. When you don't rush, motives surface on their own. Patterns repeat. Weaknesses expose themselves without pressure. Impatient people act on fragments. Patient people wait until the shape is complete. This isn't delay, it's timing. Acting when leverage compounds instead of when emotion spikes. Power respects patience because patience signals surplus. You're not chasing attention, you're not starving for outcomes. You can afford to wait, and the one who can afford to wait sets the pace. Remember this: speed creates noise, timing creates control. Strategic patience isn't slow, it's selective. And once you embody it, doors stop resisting you. They open because the moment is right, not because you forced it. These 9 principles were never meant to turn you cold, ruthless, or manipulative. They exist to strip away the behaviors that quietly train people how to use you. Every principle dismantles a habit that made you predictable, readable, and controllable while you mistook it for virtue. Calculated opacity stopped you from hemorrhaging leverage. Adaptive persona taught you how to be understood without erasing yourself. Detachment severed the fear that dictated your decisions. Silent leverage exposed the lie that power needs to be loud. Psychological echo revealed why being right is worthless if no one feels seen. Ambiguous morality forced you to judge actions by consequences, not appearances. Controlled exposure protected your value by slowing how you're consumed. Outcome obsession burned down the illusion of progress and replaced it with measurable impact. Together, these principles do one violent thing to your psychology. They move you from reacting to choosing, from being emotionally managed to emotionally sovereign, from playing fair inside a rigged system to finally seeing how the system actually moves. And let's be honest, without comforting lies. If nothing changes after this, it won't be because the principles failed. It will be because you chose safety over courage. Insight without action isn't intelligence. It's self-deception with better vocabulary. The objective was never dominance over others. It was dominance over yourself. And that kind of power is uncomfortable because it exposes exactly where you've been complicit in your own limitations. So here's the challenge, and it's designed to unsettle you. Choose one principle, not the one that inspired you, the one that irritated you, the one that made you feel exposed. For 7 days, live it quietly. No announcing, no explaining, no moral performance. Only behavior. Speak less where you used to over-justify. Detach where you used to beg silently. Reveal less where you used to overshare. Measure outcomes where you used to count effort. Then observe. Watch who becomes uneasy. Watch who treats you differently without understanding why. Watch who loses their grip on you when fear is no longer steering your choices. Those reactions will teach you faster than any book ever could. This isn't about becoming cruel. It's about becoming unreachable by manipulation. Because the most dangerous prison is the one where you believe you're free while still being controlled. Remember this: the goal was never power over others. It was power over yourself. And once you reclaim that power, the world doesn't need to be fought. It quietly rearranges itself around you.